is ended. The Atari 8-bit podcast.
Concept that was basically dead before it got born.
Sometimes you had to go across a single line of code 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 times to hear the little beep.
We thought we were going to set the world on fire and make magnetic media obsolete, but I guess we didn't.
When money's invested, there becomes a sort of a momentum involved. Nobody wants to say this was a mistake.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kay Savetz. This is a story about the rise and fall of a computer peripheral and the company behind it. The company was Databar, and the product was OSCAR, which was short for Optical SCAnning Reader. In 1983, it wasn't easy to get inexpensive software for your home computer. Floppy disks were expensive, modems were slow and expensive. You could get software in magazines. A variety of computer magazines offered computer program listings that you could type in. You might spend hours laboriously typing in a program, and it might work, or more likely, it wouldn't because of a typo or because of errors in the published listing. It wasn't easy to get inexpensive software for your computer. One solution that a couple of companies came up with was to distribute software in books and magazines. But instead of printed listings that you'd have to type in, the programs were distributed as barcodes, long collections of black and white dots. You could use a barcode scanner to read the programs into your computer. The best-known solution for this was perhaps Kazan SoftStrip. And although SoftStrip may have been the best known, it was by no means a success. I've already published interviews with the people who created SoftStrip. Another contender in this niche, and the one that this episode is about, was the Databar OSCAR. OSCAR was released 2 years before SoftStrip. OSCAR had 2 parts: the hardware, the optical scanning reader that would connect to your Atari 8-bit computer, or your Texas Instruments 99.4A, or your Commodore 64, and the barcode software, which was to be published in a special magazine called Databar. First, let's talk a little about the hardware. A silver plastic device, a little smaller than a loaf of bread, was the brains of the operation. A handheld removable wand connected via telephone-style coiled wire held the optical reader. That's the part that you would roll over the barcode to read the software into your computer. Finally, there was an interface cable that connected the main device to your computer. This is the only bit of hardware that's different in the Atari, Commodore, and Texas Instruments versions of the product. The Commodore version, for instance, connects to the C64's cassette port. The Atari version also emulates a cassette but connects to the Atari's SIO port. The hardware alone cost $79.95, but it wouldn't do much good without the barcode printed software, which was the Databar magazine. A 1-year subscription to the Databar magazine would cost an additional $120. So let's talk about the software, the magazine. Databar, the monthly barcode software magazine, was published in 1983 and turned out only to have 1 issue published, so it wasn't very monthly after all. Databar ran some advertisements in the Atari, Commodore, and Texas Instruments computer magazines. I'm going to read a bit from one of them. If you want to get more benefit out of your home computer and still avoid the purchase of expensive peripherals, if complex keyboard programming leaves you cold and you're tired of paying exorbitant prices for every new cassette or diskette program, then you're ready for OSCAR and the Databar Club. OSCAR is simply the finest handheld optical barcode reader ever developed for the home computer marketplace. It works with virtually every home computer, and together with a simple plastic template, it allows you to enter all kinds of programs into your home computer in just a few minutes. But hardware without programs is useless, and that's where the Databar Club comes in. This includes a magazine that is delivered straight to your home every month with 8 programs on subjects ranging from fun and games to education to home finances. There are actually 8 different categories in all: funware, homeware, healthware, wordware, classware, scienceware, legalware, and genware. Instead of paying $15 to $30 or more for cassette or diskette programs, or paying the $9.95 retail price for Databar programs, you can receive them for as little as $1.25 each by joining the Databar Club. So if you already have a home computer, or if you're thinking about buying one, take advantage of OSCAR's 5-way offer now. Get your full money's worth on your computer investment. Send in the coupon or call for further information. The magazine was published in 3 versions, one for the Atari 8-bit computer, one for the TI-99/4A, and a version for the Commodore 64. The cover and front part of the magazine was the same in all editions, with general interest articles like Computer Gaming, To Your Health is Up to You, and Climbing the Slippery Financial Hills. The second part of the magazine was different in each edition. This was the part with the barcodes. Each version has pretty much the same set of programs, but customized to the dialect of BASIC used on that particular computer. The selection of non-confrontational milquetoast programs includes OSCAR's Match, a memory game, Financial Quiz, Math Challenge, Health Assessment, The Law and You, and Miles per Gallon Calculator. Only 9 programs were ever published in this format for the Commodore and TI. They're all in that magazine. 13 Atari programs were published in this format in the Atari version of the magazine. The OSCAR barcode reader box claims that the hardware is also compatible with the Timex Sinclair 1000, 1500, and 2000, and the TRS-80 color computer, but I haven't seen any evidence that versions of the magazine were created for those systems, nor the hardware adapters to connect to them. One of the benefits of the reader was that it was supposed to be faster than typing. My favorite ad from the OSCAR reader says, "Programming the home computer, expert typist with keyboard versus 8-year-old with OSCAR. The task, entering a 2-page basic program. The expert typist with a 100 word per minute speed and a degree in computer programming can do it in 1 hour and 9 minutes. The little girl with bows in her hair and bubblegum in her mouth, with no prior computer experience, can enter the program using OSCAR in 8 minutes." Now that we've set the stage, it's time for the interviews. There are 3. First, Don Picard, the executive editor of Databar magazine. Then, Kim Gerritsen, the publisher of the magazine. And finally, Neil Enzenauer, the principal engineer for OSCAR. Don Picard worked for Web Publishing, a large printing company that owned a number of magazines. Don worked in a division called Creative Communications that was a custom publishing house for corporate clients. The division did work such as in-flight magazines for airlines and custom magazines for Farmers Insurance and the American Automobile Association. He was the executive editor of Databar magazine.
Let me first paint the picture for those who don't remember what personal computing was like in those days. Those were, 1982, I think, was when the investors probably put this company together. The computers, such as the early IBM PC, didn't even have floppy disks. They used, cassettes to record data in. The TI-99/4A, for example, the only way you could put data other than their cartridges in was to write in basic programs yourself. Mm-hmm. Early Commodore, same thing. And even floppy disks themselves, when they were used, were very expensive. I remember in March of '84 when the first Macintosh came out, and I had one of those. 128K floppy disks were $5 a piece in dollars that are worth a lot more than today's dollars are. So the idea these people had was that there had to be a cheaper way to get programs into computers. And their idea was that instead of using expensive floppy disks, they would print barcodes. And then they would sell a barcode reader, a handheld barcode reader, to scan those barcodes, which basically were like basic programming, into computers so they could sell games cheap. What they planned to market it, or how they planned to market it, was to put this magazine out called Databar that would have articles in about the games, would have inserts of sheets of barcode that could be scanned, and they would sell the magazine. I can't remember the price, but they would sell the magazine for some price, and people would get a very slick magazine with 10, 15, 20 programs that they could scan into their computers with a barcode reader. what happened was the barcode reader didn't actually work very well, and people that tried it had a very hard. The error rate was very high, so it was extremely difficult to get it in. But our job was that wasn't our part of it. Our part was to put out a magazine and to actually write the instructions for the software. Mm-hmm. There were several things that went wrong for them. As I say, the first one was a very obvious one. Their hardware didn't work very well. So they had a very hard time successfully entering a game into a computer without an awful lot of errors, an awful lot of tries. The second thing that went wrong for them was in worrying so much about the hardware and worrying, I know, about their games being pirated, because obviously you could take these things and Xerox on pages of paper. They neglected to realize you also had to have games people wanted. And because of the limitations of RAM in those days, they really couldn't use graphics, so it was all alphanumeric. It was like, Space Invaders using A's to shoot down Q's, sort of thing.
Right.
And they had to do it to the lowest common denominator. Whichever of those early computers had the smallest amount of RAM available, it had to fit within that. So that means the programs are pretty limited. The worst part was they weren't very fun to play. Now, we realized that. We hired a fellow to come in and just write the basic manual for the games. And he told me, he said, the games aren't very much fun. I said, well, we ain't designing them. They're just telling us to do it, so write the stuff. And the guy that was in charge of their software development didn't realize this until very near the end of the project, when he had to take care of his kids and some of their friends one weekend. He said, how would you like to come in and play some games? And so he brought them down to their offices, and they played them, and his kids told him, Dad, these games aren't very much fun. And he said, really? Well, about that time, we had actually the magazine produced, but their whole thing collapsed because they just couldn't get a reliable hand scanner on these things. And the other thing that happened was the industry moved. In a year or so from the time they formed it to the time they finally had a magazine published, now computers started coming with floppy disks, and the price of the floppy disk started going down.
Sure. Yeah.
So suddenly it was no big deal it was no longer economical to do it that way, even if you could read them in without problems. So last I heard, I left the company in the spring of '84. Last I heard is they were trying to figure out something other than some use for their barcode reading software and the barcode readers, and trying to make it work for commercial applications. The company itself ran out of money after basically going through my vague recollection is about $7 million worth of investment and not really coming up with a sale.
How many issues of the magazine did you guys produce?
1.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So that was it. I don't know if anything was ever actually entered into an Atari computer. I have no way of knowing, but I suspect not. I'm not sure they actually ever sold the magazines outside of distributing some free ones.
Yeah, I saw some ads that it was like subscribed for 2 years, and it was something like $200, which included the Databar reader.
Yep.
So I wonder how many of those subscriptions they sold. And
I would guess precious few. As I say, it no longer made economic sense. Even if it had worked as built, it no longer made much economic sense.
Right. So was it mostly games in the magazine?
All games.
It was
yes.
all games. Where did the games come from? Did the Databar people provide them to you?
Yes. Yeah, they had some coders there that wrote them, and I'm guessing they used BASIC. I doubt it was even compiled.
Probably. Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been compiled because it would have been read in directly from the barcodes. It was just some coders they had, and where they got them, I don't know. I'm guessing that they looked at commercial games that companies like Atari put out and just did some primitive versions of it that changed it enough so they wouldn't get into any trademark issues.
Did they provide them to you in the Databar format, or did you guys have to do that conversion?
No, they provided the barcodes.
Did you have issues? Were there any particular issues in printing that and making them? No,
they were just straight printed sheets of barcode. That's easy. Right. I mean, we can print perfectly.
No, I just meant in the conversion of making it work in the magazine, work with your printing system, so that
No, they were inserts. They would be page-sized inserts that would be put in. It was perfect bound, meaning the square back magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could drop these things in. They were printed separately, not run and press, and then we just inserted them at the proper point.
Oh, I see.
So there was no physical problem with it all. Had the scanner worked well, it would have worked. It still would have been made obsolete by the development of the industry, but at least that part would have worked fine.
Sure.
Yeah, that was it was a concept that was basically dead before it got born.
Right.
It was an interesting concept, and if media had stayed as expensive as it was, it might have actually developed, once they ironed out the bugs in the scanner, it might have actually worked something for them. Because it'd be certainly, if you could just run down by hand over these lines of type and put it in, they wouldn't have to be restricted to just one page. You could 10 pages. If software were, $39.95 each, then it would still be cheaper to do it that way.
Right.
But with the error rate they had, you couldn't even put one page in without about 20 tries. It's a very slick magazine. I mean, we were pretty proud of it. And then they also marketed individual games that weren't in the magazine. And they were shrink-wrapped with a kind of a cover sort of thing, and then the sheet behind it. Yeah. They were to be sold separately. And I don't recall right now whether they were the same games or the magazine or they're different games. It doesn't matter because they were all not very good games.
Was that individual program project, was that also a web publishing deal, or was that somewhere else?
Well, that was all produced by us. Again, it was all created by the Databar company.
Right.
Yeah, we did the graphics on the cover and that sort of thing. And that's what we did. We had a very big art department that did all that sort of thing all the time. But the games are created by them, and I don't remember whether the barcode sheets were provided by them or they just gave us repros that we produced. But whatever, it was all done by them. It's a fascinating concept. Even had it been done right, unfortunately, it never would have been commercially viable.
Right. You were listed as editor of this magazine. I assume you were editor of many magazines.
I was basically the executive editor for this particular division. We had about 15 employees, editors, who worked for me. So we did, I don't know. At any one time, we might do 10 or 15 magazines.
So just tell me in general about that. I mean, you're overseeing magazines of subjects that maybe you don't know anything about because, right? I mean, everything from
absolutely. Although in some cases, it's even though we did a magazine for an insurance company, most of the articles were more general in nature. But essentially, we didn't write them ourselves. We edited them. We hired freelancers, many of them with expertise, to write about the subjects we needed.
Do you remember that if you did any other computer magazines back in that time?
No, in fact, it was kind of fascinating now that you mention it, because about the time I left, which was shortly after the Databar project crashed, the Mac had come out. PC Magazine was already showing that it had promise, and I made a proposal to the company to put out a magazine for the Macintosh. Because at that time, they were just, I don't know if you remember those days, but Mac World came out, but because it was a chicken and egg sort of thing, there weren't enough readers to justify a magazine with lots of circulation. They put it out, I think, once every 6 months, and you have a subscription. They would catch up your subscription once there were enough Mac owners out there to make it viable. It was an interesting concept, but it worked because they sold so many Macs right away. Within 6 or 8 months, they were able to go monthly, as I recall.
Right.
And that was kind of the proposal some of the proposal I had, but the company wasn't at that point receptive to owning new magazines, or at least developing them. And the president of the company wasn't sure that it was actually going to be a practical use for personal computers, and so he's long retired too.
I'm wondering if the Databar people contracted out with you for one magazine, or did they, prepay for 2 years worth of stuff? Or
they did. I'll say that for our controller, he was smart enough to get money up front for this. So the first issue was prepaid, but that was it. There was never a second issue. I never actually got a look at any contract, but any contract would have been contingent upon them ordering another magazine.
Sure.
So we got our money. Perhaps the only people involved in the whole operation that did, and there was never another one.
What haven't I asked you about that project that I should have?
As I say, it was a long time ago, and it was a fascinating project to work on. I think we, on the end of the magazine, once we saw the games, realized this really wasn't going to take off too well. And then, of course, by the time we got to the end of the project, the prices were already dropping on things like floppy disk. The IBM is now coming out with a built-in floppy drive. I think it made it pretty clear that this was no longer going to be a viable economic prospect. So, but all these sorts of things, when money's invested, there becomes a sort of a momentum involved. Nobody wants to say this was a mistake. So they keep grinding on right to the end of the project. But if you can't make sales, you don't have more money, and that's what happened.
The next interview is Kim Gerritsen, the founding editor and publisher of Databar magazine.
I went to journalism school, University of Missouri, pretty nice journalism school. I ended up on the staff of Better Homes and Gardens magazine in the mid-'70s. In the late 70s, the magazine decided to add computers and stereo equipment to the editorial, and I was deemed the new products, new technology editor because the advertising department saw opportunity to sell advertising to stereo companies and to Atari, Commodore, etc. So in the early 80s, so I wrote a monthly column on these types of products, and I tested many. In the early 80s, it was probably 81, I was at the Consumer Electronics Show, and I walked by a booth that was nothing more than a folding table and a single magazine on the table. And the single magazine had a cover that said Databar. And since I was a magazine guy, Better Homes and Gardens, I stopped two guys. What is this? And they said, we're launching a company in Minneapolis that is going to build a peripheral to speed and ease the way that software is loaded into Atari and Commodore computers. And I said, how? And they opened the cover of the magazine, and their cut and paste style were some barcodes. And they said, we're going to convert, these very simple basic programs into barcodes and as a new alternative to load little programs into your computer. And I said, well, who's going to do the magazine? They said, we don't know. We're recruiting that. We've raised a lot of money in Minneapolis. And so I think it was the next month they flew me up and basically hired me on the spot. This is 1982. We had a lot of money. I believe we raised over $5 million.
Wow.
And so I arrived with...
So who were the two guys? You said the two guys at the booth.
Les was the CEO. They brought him in from Burroughs Computer. I'm blanking on his name at the moment. And the other one was an engineering guy, a hardware engineering guy from Montevideo, Minnesota. I'm blanking on his name as well. This is a long time ago.
Sure.
I'm an old guy. So it was Les and the other guy.
Okay.
And Les had a long track record at Burroughs Computer, so he was a smart guy. The investors in Minneapolis had brought him in to raise money and run this thing. One of the primary investors was a guy named Ed Orenstein, who founded Lee Computers, which was a very successful mini computer hardware company in the Twin Cities. So I arrived here in Minneapolis with a blank piece of paper in terms of launching a magazine. And the first thing I did was begin to look for a third-party custom publishing house. So I talked to several, and I ended up with Don Picard at Web Publishing, which was doing magazines for various airlines. I think they were doing the Northwest Airlines magazine at the time. And so we began to map out how we would do Databar magazine, and then what I called our sheet music software, that we would take the same programs and sell them on a cardboard backer at retail stores. So
the same programs that were in the magazine were also sold separately as one-offs.
That's correct.
Oh,
Plus a lot more. Mm-hmm. So we had sections in the magazine, funware for games, homeware for little programs like how to calculate how much lumber you need for your deck. And so we extended those categories, healthware, we extended those categories with separate standalone software. We began with web publishing and Don Picard to hire writers and map out the articles that we had, come up with the software concepts and then map out the articles and hire freelance writers. Our intention, as you pointed out, was to have a monthly subscription magazine product with the premier edition in the box with OSCAR. We hired freelance writers. We hired a digital graphic artist who did those images that you see on the front of the software pieces that you've pictured and scanned. So this was very early in terms of kind of computer digital art. We hired a guy named Patrick Redmond here in Minneapolis, who was a real pioneer in computer digital art. Meanwhile, the engineering team was, engineering the optics for the OSCAR scanner while I was doing the publishing. And I don't know if previous interviews have talked about this, but they had a very hard time getting that optics correct, meaning a simple, easy way to scan the 31 lines of code on a page. We saw early on in trying to engineer that user experience that the little handheld optical reader, it was hard to stay on those 31 lines because they're not very high. So kind of a late decision was made to mold that plastic template with the slots in it that you would place over the pages for the optical head to run in those slots. But we finally got it, ready to ship, and we launched it at CES in '83. We got a lot of publicity, a lot of articles. I think one of the PC magazines called it the most interesting peripheral of the summer CES show. Wow. By the way, that same show, I went to a Sony party at the Chicago Playboy Mansion, and Ray Charles was the entertainment. So I'll always remember that launch CES show. So we shipped pre-holiday, 1983. And again, I'll be honest, the stuff started coming. We had Toys R Us was our main retailer. Alarmingly, the stuff started coming back. It was just not easy to get those, call it 31 lines of code on a page and 3 to 7 pages of code to load your 7K calculator to calculate lumber for a deck. So that really spelled the end, which was our customer service nightmare. It was a really good value proposition because the Atari and Commodore owners knew what limited options they had to run things on their machine. It was, I like to say, consumers, when they see something new like that, they look in the rearview mirror and, they'd never seen anything in front of them like an optical reader to patiently, and sometimes you had to go across a single line of code 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 times to hear the little beep for that one line to load. So that really spelled the end. We just didn't get the user experience right.
Was it that the hardware it didn't work? The hardware didn't work reliably, or was it that it was just hard to use for the consumer side?
I think it was a combination of both. I think, the optical had to touch or maybe I can't remember if the optical had to touch the printed page or be millimeters away from it. And even though we had that plastic guide, the plastic template, to ask somebody to maintain a regular speed, distance from the paper with the optical head, etc., turned out to be too challenging.
So there was that advertisement showing a little girl in front of the computer, and it said, like, this little girl can scan in a program faster than this professional typist can type it in. Remember that?
Probably in the end she still could, but she had to make 5 passes across one of the 31.
Girl would be crying by the end. This doesn't work. So why, it seems, tell me if I'm wrong, that this could have worked at that moment in time, because floppy disk media was still very expensive.
Right.
And modems hadn't happened yet.
Right.
And there was just this moment in time, but then the media cost came down, and then people could download things from BBSs and CompuServe, and
that's right.
The moment had passed. Is that accurate?
I think that's absolutely accurate. I think that if Toys R Us, great retailer, if we had sold, $250,000 Oscars that holiday and had less than 5% returns, I think the investors would have re-upped. I think that we would have been seriously looked at by Atari and Commodore as a business partner. I think you're right. I think it could have worked in a moment in time. I'll go back to the founding of the magazine when they hired me, coming from Better Homes and Gardens. I looked at the magazines that were currently out, and they were, as you know, they were all for enthusiasts. And I said, why don't we launch a home and family lifestyle magazine? I'm coming from Better Homes and Gardens. I've been writing about the emergence of these computers in the household. Women are very much in control of buying them for the promise of what they're going to do for their children and both education and fun. Men like to, fiddle and faddle around, and so lumber calculators can appeal to them. Women are very interested in the health of their family. So why don't we stick our neck out and launch a magazine, a home and family service magazine that, again, I like to use the term speeds and eases the way that you can unlock the potential of these Ataris and Commodores.
Nice. So you did the one issue. The subscription was expensive.
It was.
I mean, I assume it was expensive because it included the Databar reader itself, and also you had this third-party web publishing actually producing it.
That's right. We didn't really get much pushback or even much feedback on the subscription, because I think that call it the out-of-box experience. So you bought OSCAR at Toys R Us, you took it home, you took out this cool little device, very beautiful magazine, no stock photography, it was all original photography. And for the ability to get, 10 or 12 or 14 new programs every month for this Atari that you had sitting there. Again, not a lot of pushback.
Okay. So you said you were hoping for 250,000 sales, less than 5% return rate. Do you remember what those numbers actually were approximately? I mean, did you sell 50,000 even? Did you?
I think we sold. The number 35,000 sticks in my head, but I don't know if that's it.
Okay. But it was low, and then there was the high return rate.
It was a high return
rate. At what point did it become clear that there wasn't going to be a second issue? Did you start on it?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, I think we had articles in the bank for 3 or 4 issues. So it became clear, going into 84, call it by Q2 84, it was clear that our, original model, wasn't going to work. The company still had funding, but this consumer sold at retail proposition, was not really going to work. So we pivoted to, more looking at the engineering we'd done and the optics we had. Could we start a business, a B2B side of the business on scanning with our optics? We did get the opportunity to participate in the World Series of Poker that I told you about. Can I tell you that story?
I would love to hear that story. Yes, please.
Okay. So when USA Today wrote about us, we had a call from Mike Caro, C-A-R-O, in Las Vegas. And he's called the mad genius of poker. He's a pretty famous poker guy still today. And Mike called us and said, I've spent about 2 years programming an old Apple II to play no-limit Texas Hold'em poker, and I'm well known enough here in Las Vegas that I've challenged some of the top players in the world for a demonstration at the upcoming World Series of Poker. He said, the problem is Doyle Brunson and the other top players who want to play my computer, they don't trust that if paper cards are dealt, my hand and their hand, and I have to type the paper cards into the ORAC computer. ORAC is Caro spelled backwards. They don't trust me in terms of typing in the dealt cards, theirs and mine. So do you suppose you guys could engineer your optical scanner such to scan barcodes printed on the face of playing cards? And we said, sure we can. So it took us a couple of weeks, and we built a ramp and permanently mounted the OSCAR optical head in the ramp. And then we found a printer, actually one of the largest printer of paper playing cards was here in Minneapolis. We found a printer to print unique codes on the face of cards. And we flew out to Vegas 2 days ahead of the World Series of Poker, which was at Binion's Horseshoe Casino in downtown Vegas. We thought this is going to be great publicity for our restart, maybe figure out still how to have this consumer product, etc. So we get to Mike Caro's apartment, and he's madly debugging his software and cursing and drinking a lot of beer and eating a lot of candy bars. And right up until we have to load this computer in his van to get down to the World Series. So we set up right in the middle of the floor. And of course, we got backroom access because we were in effect players. So we got backroom access with, 5-pound cold lobsters and beluga caviar and all that. And we held our own. I flew out with a buddy, David Mitchell, who might be interesting to talk to at some point too, because he was our chief software engineer. So David sat at the table and scanned the cards in OSCAR, and I was an observer, and we held our own. I think we played 4 or 5 matches and won 3 of them. So it was quite an impressive demonstration. So much so that there was a scout for the television program Ripley's Believe It or Not, hosted by Jack Palance. And we got a call from Mike Caro a couple of weeks after the World Series saying Ripley's Believe It or Not wants to tape a segment of ORAC against one of the top poker players in the world, Bob Stupak. Bob Stupak, now dead, owned and built the Stratosphere Casino in Las Vegas. Caro said that Stupak has bet $500,000 that he can beat ORAC the computer, and another casino owner in Vegas who absolutely hates Bob Stupak, he's backing me with $500,000. So we flew out again, and once again, Mike is debugging the computer for hours and minutes before the TV lights go on. The whole television lights and cameras are set up. We start to roll. There's actually $1 million of cash sitting in the middle of the table. $500,000 from Stupak, $500,000 from his enemy, the other casino owner. And we were holding our own. We were quite ahead of Bob Stupak. Mike Carroll will write that somebody kicked a cable and we had to reboot the ORAC computer. I think what actually happened is we hit a bug and Stupak went all in and ORAC, the computer, got confused and folded. Should not have folded because Stupak went all in on a worse hand than we had scanned in to the computer with ORAC. So I think you can still find that episode on Google, Ripley's Believe It or Not, December 9th, 1984.
Ripley's Believe It or Not, 12/9/84. I will look that up. That's interesting. Neat. Yeah, the article that you sent me, it said that someone kicked a cable, and so you're saying that's not what really happened.
That's accurate.
Nice. Fun. Were there any other weird publicity stunts or things that happened with Databar?
That was the weirdest. We did do some mall intercepts, and of course, when you intercept somebody in a mall during holiday shopping season, they think they want you to be all positive. So we were probably buoyed by the positive response we got by having people try OSCAR in malls. I think we actually set up in some Toys R Us stores too and demoed OSCAR. But again, in my experience, market research like that, people want to be nice and think you want them to be nice. So that was probably not great market research.
Right. Yeah. So I know the magazine was available for Atari, Commodore PET 64, and TI-99. I think you said that they may have been working on other editions as well. Do you remember?
Yeah, I know we had Timex and Sinclair. Are those one and the same?
That's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I knew we had those in the shop that we were working on. PC Junior. I think that's the extent that we were working on.
Cool. So did you have in-house staff programmers churning out these little programs?
We did. And David Mitchell, who I mentioned earlier, was the head software programmer. David went on to found a outsourced software company that was an Inc. 500 company for 3 or 4 years. He retired early because he sold it to a bigger company, and still a very good friend of mine here in the Twin Cities.
Nice. So then you guys pivoted and tried to make this thing work with PCs and kind of went into other fields of the scanning other than magazines, right?
Right. We looked at some B2B, some industrial applications like inventory scanning and all, there were handheld barcode scanners for inventory and other things in B2B and industrial. But our optics were, cheaper, better, faster. We just never found those markets before we ran out of money and the investors wouldn't re-up. The last day when Les Arnold was his name from Burroughs Computer, he ended up dying. He was a very triple type A guy, chain smoker, wound up. He ended up dying of a heart attack within I think 3 or 4 years after Databar. But the day he called us all together and said, we're shutting down and all the software engineers have to go, and we're keeping some of the hardware optics engineers on board. And they were keeping me because I was doing marketing for the company. I basically had to stand at the door and go through the boxes of very good friends of mine to make sure they weren't stealing stuff. That was a hard day.
Our final interview is with Neil Enzenauer, the principal engineer for the OSCAR barcode reader hardware.
Well, I'm kind of surprised that you even ran across Databar. It's one of those footnotes in my life. But it was exciting at the time.
I bet.
We thought we were going to set the world on fire and make magnetic media obsolete, but I guess we didn't.
No.
You have a copy of my barcode reader there, at least the hardware. It doesn't do what the function it was originally designed to. It was actually adapted. And it was a pretty cute little barcode reader. It was, like I said, adapted towards a different market. And that particular unit does universal barcode at this point with the firmware that's in there. We were trying to present a consumer grade product, so we made low cost, as you can imagine, a primary focal point. And as a result of that, it looks very good as a consumer product. It just wasn't timed appropriately for barcode programs. I can remember playing some of those programs myself and thinking, well, this is kind of neat, but the barcode print and the wand actually comes out of a say and spell from a TI unit. And again, that was aligned towards cost-effective consumer-grade product kind of a situation.
So, see, the wand came from a speak and spell?
Yeah, that's actually where that was designed into. We found the supplier of that, and we were able to capture a bunch of those.
Huh. Were you there for the founding of Databar, or was it there when you joined?
Well, I was there in the beginning, but it had already started. My boss was my manager at Control Data, MPI, Magnetic Peripherals, which is a disk drive company. And he was probably the smartest guy in software I ever met. He showed me some things, and I have to admit, I'm fair at writing software, but more so from a firmware standpoint, he was really good at that. And he had an opportunity to become the director of engineering at Databar. Rod Larson was his name.
What was his name?
Rod Larson.
Okay.
He got that opportunity, and he asked me if I wanted to join. He said he wanted me to think about it pretty thoroughly, but I've always had more fun at startups than I've had at big companies. I guess it's making a difference kind of a situation. I sent you my card there as well. I was the digital hardware engineer or the digital engineer involved in it. I did a lot of the firmware involved with drivers and things of that nature, as far as setup program was concerned. That particular device can work as with a monitor also to do setup, but it has programmable via the barcode wand input also. When we got there was already some base hardware design, but we just made it developed and cost-effective for consumer applications, which means we were supposed to crank it up to 50,000 units a month.
Wow.
Never quite got there. Yeah. It was one of those things that when you're in a consumer market, you got to, again, pay attention to low cost because it's got to be affordable. And if I remember right, the cost of all of the components in there is like $12 or $11, something like that. The
hardware itself, the OSCAR, looks pretty well done. I mean, all the painting and the plastic work all fit really, really well. Maybe you've noticed. We kind of took some pride in that when we went to market.
The original idea for this OSCAR device was, as I understand it, was to have it connect to the various home computers of the day, the Atari, the Commodore, the TI, to input programs so they didn't have to be typed in or stored on magnetic media. Was that the vision?
That was the vision, exactly. And in fact, we in the hardware department got even carried away, and we wrote some of our own programs for this. Pigs in Space was a real winner. We loved that one. And there was tic-tac-toe, and there was some memory games and things of this nature. I wish I could remember all of them that were there, but I can't at the moment. It was printed on a magazine that was probably 30 pages, and it was supposed to come out every month, is what it was supposed to do.
And as I understand, only one issue of that magazine actually came out. Is that right?
I think that's true.
So did you guys
we got in
Did you guys write the games in-house?
Well, there was a software group in Databar that was had a lot of programmers to do that kind of function. They were developing these, and there was probably, I'm going to guess, 50 or 60 programs that were actually developed, maybe not completed, but for that barcode magazine. I think probably only that first issue, which you're talking about, came out with half a dozen or 12 or somewhere in between there. I don't recall anymore. It was probably about a 30-page magazine, colored, glossy. It looked official.
It's a 90-page magazine, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 8 programs in it.
Okay. So. See, I'm just remembering. You've got one?
I do. I have one. I have the TI-99 version. Apparently, there were different versions of the magazine. One for the Atari, one for the Commodore, one for the TI, and the one I have here is for the TI. So.
Okay, and it is glossy, like I mentioned, is it not?
Yeah, it's glossy. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks real official.
So, where did this company come from? Was it born for this project, or did it exist before this?
No. The man behind OSCAR and Databar. OSCAR stands for Optical SCAnning Reader, by the way. And it was an Ed Orenstein, and he had successful companies in Data 100, and there was another one that he was involved with, and this was his third one. Ed was always a guy who wanted to be in the background. He didn't want to be up front as such. So there was a president and several different presidents, as a matter of fact. And we merged with a company called Microdynamics because they were supposed to be the manufacturing arm to produce these cost effectively. So a captive manufacturing group, Microdynamics was. So we expanded into those areas, also did other contract manufacturing, but that was aside from what we were doing at Databar. I forget the gentlemen's names who were president. Glazer was one of them. There was another guy. I cycled through a couple of them because I think it became obvious that barcode programs weren't going to overtake magnetic media. Mm-hmm. Although at the time we got started with this, the biggest disk drive that was available, ones that I worked on, were RSD and FSD from Control Data, about 200 megabytes, and they were in the size of a small bread box. Obviously, we've gone way past that in magnetic media, and right at this moment, SSDs are starting to overtake them a little bit. The whole department of software people, I can remember my cohort or my peer was Michael Barsness. He led that group, and Stan Strong was their director. They were busy cranking out these software. It was kind of interesting to see all these guys doing consumer software and then playing these games. What kind of a company, all you do is play games all the time? Well, they did, and they'd suck us in there every once in a while. That's why we came back with Pigs in Space. I already told you about that. That was I forget, Mike, my tech, actually did that. He was a funny guy. And our hardware department was probably about 6-7 people. I mean, we were pretty lean, and we developed this barcode reader to go into production, and it actually did kick off. And I'm not sure how many we actually built. I'd say maybe 20,000, 30,000, maybe a few more. But
wow,
it became obvious that it wasn't the right place to try and take over, because magnetic media still had some life in it, obviously.
So if you built 20 or 30,000, how many do you think were sold?
A couple thousand, maybe.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. I know this isn't really encouraging, but when things weren't going well, we were having OSCAR footballs in the back of the warehouse there, tossing them around. And we had to do something to use up our time when it wasn't going right.
Wow. So you said you were principal engineer. So what was your primary job for creating this thing?
I was responsible for all of the hardware, the card layout, and actually, I'll send you another picture of what it morphed to, and maybe a little bit of an explanation. I tried to gather the schematics that I had here, but I purged two completely. I do have schematics of a follow-on unit here, but not of that particular one. You have a bare board there as well. It's just a micro and a EEPROM. And at the time, we didn't make it absolutely cheap as possible. We had sockets for that micro and the EEPROM because we were kind of changing functions, as I told you, and the firmware had to do that. And we weren't quite sure that we trusted microprocessors, but that was just somebody in the scheme of things that it was the most expensive part on the board. There really isn't much else that's on there, but an address latch and a data bus. It should have gone to ROM, and that would have been the next phase for that micro, is to cost reduce it even further, make it even smaller. There's some circuits that are there. I had another engineer I worked with who was responsible for the drive circuit, although I had to interface to it. It was pretty straightforward. And there was a voltage regulator circuit that wasn't very exciting, but it had to perform to make sure that there was power that was available. So I did all the layout and the checkout, and I did some testing for units when they came out of manufacturing to make sure that they were alive and well and happy.
So I'm looking at this board that you sent me. So this is the board that was that's inside all of the readers, correct?
Yeah.
And it was the same board for no matter what computer you're connecting to? Yes. Okay. I'll post a picture of the board in the show notes. I notice that the EEPROM doesn't have the window's not covered, so it's probably long forgotten what it was supposed to remember. So how did it work so that this OSCAR unit could work with Atari and Commodore and TI? What was different in the interface?
Well, it was mostly just drive circuitry and the way the connections were hooked up. There may have been an adapter for certain flavors of computer, because obviously all of their connectors are a little bit different. I don't remember specifically how they made the software know which computer was attached, but there was a method that allowed them to do that, and some of the things that took place there. This was 30 years ago, almost, that we did this. So yeah. I'm recalling from memory.
Sure.
On how this worked effectively. It was just set up to be universal from that standpoint and work with all of these computers.
Looking at the barcode scans, I mean, there's this page that is just filled with maybe 30 strips of codes, and there's a picture of a little 8-year-old girl scanning in the thing. So it looks like you just manually by hand move the reader across the each of these strips. Is that right? And did you?
Yeah.
Okay. So did it matter?
And you got feedback on each correct read,
mm-hmm.
and then you could go on to the next line. If you didn't get that correct feedback, you'd rescan that line.
Were you aware of another product? Actually, I'm not sure which one came first. There was another similar product called Cousin Soft Strip.
No, I've never heard of that.
I found there were advertisements in Atari magazines and Commodore magazines. Did did orders just not come in? Had people already moved to floppy drives by the time you had released? I mean, what went wrong?
The sophistication of the user, you see that picture of that little girl there?
Mm-hmm.
She might not be patient enough to actually scan all of those barcodes in. So it was that market, those people, children, weren't necessarily sophisticated enough to make this work. The complexity of the software wasn't really as sophisticated to the higher end users that were out there already with the games that they had found online, or available, I should say.
Sure. You told me that after the Atari and Commodore products didn't work out, that the hardware was repurposed into a more general reader. You said it was cannibalized, you said. Can you talk to me about what you did and what was changed?
Yeah, the hardware basically is the same. Okay, but the firmware that went into it is basically now, that you have, is a universal barcode reader for Databar, UPC. I forget. I think there's about 8 or 11. I think it says there on the directions that I sent you how many barcodes that it actually decodes. So that unit now is a basic little barcode reader, and it can buffer, and you can send data out of it. So it could be used for an inventory kind of a situation. Or we adapted them also into the video arena so that you could check out your videos. We had a metal case, and you'd slide the videos along a little bed that would read these. And there were other morphed applications that took place. The functionality of the unit was pretty good. The wand itself had a tendency to pick up dirt and debris and had to be cleaned periodically. Usually as simple as rubbing it on a piece of printer paper. That was coarse enough to actually deal with it. But otherwise, the light, the reflections would get distorted, and it wouldn't read appropriately, or it would read more difficult. That was also one of the frailties associated with that magazine, is that it picked up some of the print and then eventually clogged up a little bit, and the users had to be trained on how to clean it again on a piece of printer paper. It wasn't anything abrasive, but you had to just rub it on there to get some of the residue off. The OSCAR and the DBR 800, I think is what that is, or maybe it was the 100, was as good as it could be for the hardware. It wasn't a wonderful product from a functionality standpoint when it morphed to this universal barcode reader. But we had all these units we had to do something with.
It was that or play football, I guess, in the warehouse, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did that a couple different times.
This thing was born and died in 1983, and you were at the company until 1986. So you guys really, seems like, made a push for a good long time to get the universal reader to go.
We did. We did spend a lot of time, spend a lot of effort. Drivers, architected a systems software. My background, systems engineering, I helped to do that. I built the tools that allowed our programmers to actually write code to do all of these other things, as opposed to getting a circuit emulator. We had something called a software monitor that allowed us to set breakpoints, and I could keep a dozen engineers, a dozen software programmers working on this without having a golden tool. So we probably should have been working on the product more than the tools, but nonetheless the tool was priced right, and it helped us to get a lot of firmware and software done in that universal barcode reader that we developed. There were some cash flow problems associated with a startup company. Obviously, stock options were the golden handcuffs that kept you there, kept you wanting to make it work and to go and survive. Part of being a smaller company is having those things available. And working in a smaller company is very exciting because you can make a difference, and people don't want to tell you can't do that because they want you to do more than you're supposed to. And all of that is very, very exciting for a young person.
I bet.
Yeah, my systems background, hardware, software, systems, circuits, I was able to play in all of those areas. One of my challenges in life is that I become, I wouldn't say I'm ADD, but once you do something long enough, it gets boring. So if you can switch hats, it becomes a lot more interesting for a duration of time, and you can become an expert in that area all over again.
Awesome. So Eden Prairie, Minnesota doesn't seem like a hotbed of tech startups. What would you know why you guys were there?
Minnesota, generally speaking, does or has had an affinity for startups. A lot of them are associated with the medical industry, but for a while we were supercomputer and networking type companies were starting here. As far as Eden Prairie, Minnesota, that's the western suburbs that experienced a growth spurt about that time, where they were allowing for companies to grow, expand, start, because there were more and more buildings going on in commercial areas. Still a pretty big commercial area in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. In fact, Eden Prairie, Minnesota currently also is the practice facility for the Minnesota Vikings, which is just down the street from where Databar was, as a matter of fact. So there is a lot of industry there, and for a while it was a bedroom community with industry. Now there's a lot of industry and people driving out to that area of town coming from other areas. Eden Prairie by itself, nice enough place.
So what haven't I asked you about that time that I should have?
I miss the people that were there. I think I conveyed enough to get any readers or listeners that you have excited about an opportunity to be involved with a startup company. It doesn't always pan out, but the golden handcuffs can make a lot of money if you're successful and effective in those startups.
How did your time there come to an end?
They couldn't make payroll, and a company sought me out, wanted me to become a field application engineer for a semiconductor company in the Minneapolis area, reporting to California.
Well, thank you, Neil. I appreciate it.
Good talking to you, Kevin. Thanks for letting me talk about Databar.
Thanks to Don Picard, Kim Gerritsen, and Neil Enzenauer. Thanks to Alan Bushman for scanning the Atari version of the Databar magazine and OSCAR instructions. Dogox on Twitter for writing the Python script to decode the barcodes without a scanner. Thanks to Paul Rickards for wrangling the Commodore software, and to Travis Goodspeed for the proof of concept or get the fuck out zine, which was instrumental in bringing the pieces together. Thanks to the Internet Archive for hosting scans of the magazines and all the software. The interview with Don Picard took place on April 5, 2016. The interview with Kim Gerritsen took place on June 27, 2016. A video version of that interview is available, including an extended version where we also discuss CD-ROM publishing and the Prodigy online service. The interview with Neil Enzenauer took place on April 12, 2016. Check the show notes at AtariPodcast.com for scans of the Databar magazine and manuals, all 3 versions, and downloadable, ready-to-run versions of the Databar software for all 3 platforms, and the Databar patent, modern software for decoding the barcodes, and much more background material. If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are 2 ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savetz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.